Finally, be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition, with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace, in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for the saints. So that was Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 20. We're presented here by Paul with a problem, and that problem is the devil and his schemes. It's the struggle, he says in verse 12, which is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, and against the powers of this dark world, and the spiritual forces of evil. So, Paul is presenting a problem here, and that's basically the devil and his evil schemes. Later on, we're presented with a solution, and that solution is the full armor of God. Well, what does the full armor of God consist of? So Paul breaks it down to us a little bit, with the buckle of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, and our feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition, he notes to take up the shield of faith, which we can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. And then lastly, he talks a little bit about the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. So we have the problem identified. The answer, the solution to this problem would be the full armor of God. The full armor of God, as we've noted, consists of many things. But finishing up, the word of God, as Paul says, which consists of the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit. So the word of God is our armor. The word of God is our refuge. And not only does he mention putting on the full armor of God, but he also mentions prayer. So with prayer, we can persevere in these battles. We can be assured that God keeps our armor intact. So a very simple illustration I am going to use here for the full armor of God is just by taking a simple orange in a little bowl of water. So when we're wearing the full armor of God, when we have the word of God and we have the prayer, we can be assured that our armor is intact, so that when evil comes, we may stand. We may stand firm. Let's see. As Paul says in verse 13, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. Stand firm, he says, much like this. No matter what happens, the full armor of God. We may get a little dizzy. We may sink for a little bit. But the full armor of God keeps us afloat. Now, what happens when our armor is pierced and it's not reinforced by things like prayer and just by reading the Word of God and putting it into place? Sometimes we can get torn up. Sometimes we can get distracted with the problems of the world, and, well, let's just put it this way, we sink. So we have a couple options here. We can abide by Paul's example. We can look at this problem and we can partake in doing what he's saying to do to solve this, to wear the full armor of God, to pray, to be so intimately involved with the Word of God, to keep our armor intact, and we can float, or we can become torn apart by Satan, who works through all different kinds of things, people, to rip us up and ultimately to sink.